I am like sort of blacklisted in Hollywood because they're afraid of me.
I have an epic war with Ellen DeGeneres, and I have a loathing for her that is epic in size as well.
You know, mostly about children and women. And those are the people that I always wanted to protect and take care of.
One thing I want to do is I just want to stay in it. You know, I'm not going to let them win.
Rosie O'Donnell and Kathy Griffin have been holding secrets about Ellen DeGeneres for years. Not only about just Ellen treating her coworker badly, but to what really happened on Jeffrey Epstein's island.
So when, you know, all this Harvey Weinstein stuff is going on, you know, I kind of know certain words and certain triggers, and I'm kind of aware of all that stuff. And, you know, I was myself twice.
All it looked to me was like a controlling the process, saying, you're gonna say this to save face from me. And I said that. And then I said some facts about him, that he never paid his vendors, that he was charged with abuse by 26 women. I said all the facts about him that were very easy to find.
Rosie and Kathy have finally decided to share the real truth, and every trail keeps pointing back to the island activities.
And all the lies that cover one another, and unless you experience that, it's very hard to believe. Why didn't they just walk away? Well, they were 17 and 21. They were kids. They were children who had been abused the vast majority of their childhood in horrific ways.
The most powerful woman in the history of daytime television didn't just retire, she vanished. Or at least she tried to. When news broke that Ellen DeGeneres had packed up her life and fled to a remote corner of the English countryside, known as the Cotswolds, the official story was one of political frustration. Her team made sure the headlines reflected a woman who was simply done with the direction of the United States. But if you look at the timing, the math just doesn't add up. Why would a woman who built a billion-dollar empire on being the queen of nice suddenly feel the need to put an entire ocean between herself and her legacy? The reality is that the walls weren't just closing in on her reputation, they were closing in on her safety. For years, the public saw the dancing, the pranks, and the relentless mantra to be kind to one another. But behind the scenes, a very different story was being written by the people who actually knew her. While the mainstream media was busy spinning a narrative about a toxic workplace, a much darker set of whispers was beginning to surface in the corners of the internet that the elite couldn't control. We're talking about connections to figures whose names are synonymous with the darkest crimes imaginable. The move to the UK wasn't just a change of scenery. For Ellen, it was the creation of a buffer zone. It was a calculated attempt to find a highly protected haven far away from the jurisdiction of federal investigators who were beginning to unseal documents that many in Hollywood hoped would stay buried forever. But the ocean isn't as wide as it used to be. While Ellen was setting up her new life in a village full of high-security estates and celebrity neighbors, two of her oldest peers were preparing to do the one thing the industry had forbidden for decades: tell the absolute, unvarnished truth. Rosie O'Donnell and Kathy Griffin didn't just have a few mean girl stories to share. They held the keys to a history that Ellen had spent 20 years trying to erase. They weren't just looking for an apology for a few snubs in the 90s. They were looking to expose a system of protection and silence that allowed some of the most powerful people on the planet to operate with total impunity. And to understand why Ellen is running now, you have to understand the specific bridge she burned to get to the top.
But I think audiences have sort of proved since box sets that they like being in control.
That's pretty cool to have your own island.
It is. It's I think I'm going to call it Melville.
Uh-huh.
Your show is F-Boy Island on HBO Max. What do you think F-Boy Island is about?
A sexy man on an island.
He owned beauty pageants, and if you grew up in New York like I, you knew who he was from the get-go. In New York, he's not respected, and he never was. And I grew up watching his planes be repossessed off the runways at LaGuardia, watching him try to sell steaks and vodka.
What if you've done all of this and nothing happens? And I really have been thinking about that since she said that. And my answer to her at the time, and it kind of is still the same answer, is I guess I'm just going to feel like everybody else that has ever come forward and been dismissed by the system. I was told repeatedly, daily almost, that radio silence was of the utmost importance to protect the other survivors. And to that I say, I don't know who the hell they are.
Only tell the truth. That's all people want now is authenticity.
Yeah.
We've been lied to for so long by, mainstream media.
Yeah.
I don't know how he survived. I really don't. And, I tend to believe what he said because he's sort of so removed from it, dissociating. He's not like going back to the memory. He's just reporting on it almost as if it didn't happen. He got protection and purchased it. He made a, criminal conspiracy deal with CS and the powers that be at the time. Agreed that it was better to pay the bully than to stand and fight with a case where they did nothing wrong.
Right.
And they decided to pay him off, so they paid him off. And guess what? Once you do that in a neighborhood in Little Italy, you're owned.
I was investigated by the Department of Justice.
So you're the queen of cancel.
Who put me under an investigation, put me on the no-fly list, interrogated me under oath, and were considering charging me with conspiracy.
To understand the war between Rosie O'Donnell and Ellen DeGeneres, you have to go back to a time when being yourself was a death sentence for a career in show business. In the late 1980s and early 90s, the comedy scene was a battlefield, especially for women. Rosie and Ellen were essentially the front lines. They endured the same smoky clubs, the same drunk, hostile crowds, and a hierarchy entirely controlled by men who didn't want them there. Because the industry was so aggressively against them, they formed what Rosie later described as a chosen family. They weren't just friends, they were witnesses to each other's survival. When Ellen reached a public breaking point with her personal life in the mid-90s, she needed a shield. She was a rising sitcom star, but the pressure to stay in the closet was becoming unbearable. She turned to Rosie, who already had the #1 talk show in the country. At that time, Rosie hadn't even come out publicly herself, but she made a choice that put her own career at massive risk. She invited Ellen onto her stage and used her platform to build a wall of protection around her. This was the moment of the now infamous Lebanese joke. By framing Ellen's identity through humor and lightheartedness, Rosie essentially gave Ellen the all-clear from Middle America. She humanized her, protected her, and gave her the social capital she needed to transition from a sitcom actress into a daytime icon. But in the cold, calculated world of Hollywood, loyalty is often treated as a liability. Once Ellen had what she needed, once she had the Ellen DeGeneres Show and the Be Kind brand, the people who knew her before the transformation became a threat. They knew the real woman behind the dancing. In 2004, during an appearance on Larry King Live, Ellen was asked about her relationship with Rosie. Instead of acknowledging the woman who literally risked her livelihood to save Ellen's brand, Ellen looked into the camera and said, "I don't really know Rosie that well. I mean, I've spoken to her, but we're not really friends." Rosie was watching that interview from her living room with her wife, and she described the moment as one of the most painful betrayals of her life. It wasn't just a snub, it was a systematic erasure. Ellen wasn't just moving on, she was deleting the history of everyone who could testify to who she really was before the Be Kind machine was built. This pattern of using people as stepping stones and then discarding them like a rough draft would become the hallmark of Ellen's career. But while she was busy erasing Rosie, she was also creating a new enemy in Kathy Griffin, an enemy who wouldn't just sit at home and be hurt, but would spend the next 20 years taking notes.
It didn't have to go down this way. She could have been brilliantly talented in front of the camera and carried that backstage, and she didn't. Every Friday we were shaking, who's going to get fired this Friday?
This cannot become America ever. We have to fight against this. And we will, and we're strong, and we're the majority, regardless of what different channels want to tell you.
It's just an interesting move. I think she's mainly moving because we don't like her anymore.
Oh, Ellen.
Do you think she's just moving because she's done here?
Look, does she have an entertainment career? A lot of people say no. After the whole scandal happened where it was revealed she was like a monster on set to her employees, right?
Hey, wait a minute. I'm a big fan of Casey Kasem. Listen.
You go, girl.
Maybe I'm Lebanese.
You could be Lebanese.
I could be Lebanese myself. I didn't know that.
I was never asked to go on her show. When I was, it was long after they had been on for many years, and she had the same staff as my show, the same producers, the same everything. I did think that she was all of a sudden in the position I was in, where she was starting a show and wanted it to be successful and get the money and the accolades that came with it. And instead of deciding to stand next to me and hold my hand, which is what I did to her, she did the opposite.
If Rosie O'Donnell was the emotional heart of the resistance against Ellen, Kathy Griffin was the tactical commander. Kathy had worked with Ellen in the 90s and had seen through the pleasant dancing act almost immediately. She recognized what she called a controlling and punishing streak that everyone in Hollywood knew about but was too terrified to mention. For decades, Ellen's power was so absolute that even a minor disagreement could get a comedian blacklisted from every major network. Kathy, however, has never been one for silence. The clash between them became a public spectacle when Ellen, using the massive pulpit of her daytime show, delivered a scripted monologue that publicly labeled Kathy as mean in front of millions of viewers. This wasn't just a playground insult, it was a professional hit. It was Ellen telling the industry and her audience that Kathy Griffin was not one of us. This act proved to Kathy that Ellen would use her power to crush any woman who didn't play along with the lie. And Kathy wasn't the only one who had experienced this. The story of Margaret Cho is perhaps the most telling example of how Ellen's ego operated. Margaret had opened for Ellen on the road during the 80s, sharing years of history in the trenches of stand-up. Yet, when Margaret appeared as a guest on Ellen's talk show years later, Ellen treated her like a total stranger. She erased their shared history right there on the stage. But it went deeper than just being cold. Inside sources later revealed that Ellen used her power in the editing room to cut entire segments of Margaret's interview, specifically a moment where the legendary David Bowie, who was also a guest, paid a massive compliment to Margaret. Think about that for a second. The level of insecurity required to edit out praise from David Bowie just because it might make someone else on the stage look more interesting is staggering. This spotlight is mine only mentality created a culture of fear backstage that lasted for nearly 20 years. We've all heard the stories now. The no eye contact rule, the toxic workplace allegations, the staffers who were terrified to be in the same hallway as her. But for Kathy Griffin and Rosie O'Donnell, these weren't just workplace grievances. They were symptoms of a much larger, much darker rot. Because when you spend that much energy controlling the narrative of a nice girl, you have to wonder what exactly you're trying to hide. And as it turns out, the mean girl stories were just the tip of a very dark iceberg.
But I just love giving Ellen because it just never gets old. She just can't stand it. She has no sense of humor about herself. We had a fight one time that was a knockdown drag out, screaming on the phones, both of us screaming.
Ellen was like really weird and not nice to me for most of my career, and like because I opened for her in the 1980s.
Ellen DeGeneres is named in the Epstein documents, and that part is real. Her name appears in the broader index of over 300 high-profile individuals that show up across the investigative materials. Flight logs, communications, third-party interviews, peripheral records.
I know that I'm in a position of privilege and power, and I realize that with that comes responsibility, and I take responsibility for what happens at my show.
Both of them are ridiculous. Who thinks that antiquated way that you're going to find your love in a paradise island and it's going to last forever?
I think in her mind, she thinks I keep rehashing it for pleasure. I don't rehash it for pleasure. I rehash it because our careers have taken sort of parallel, interwoven paths.
Yes. I mean, I'm not the first person to say this, but she's a strange creature.
Well, we're not similar. I can say that for sure. We're not emotionally.
No.
While the Hollywood drama was unfolding, a man named Sasha Riley was living a very different reality. Sasha isn't a typical Hollywood insider looking for 15 minutes of fame or a book deal. He is a 52-year-old retired Army sergeant, a man whose background is rooted in discipline and service. But Sasha holds a story that connects the world of daytime television to the darkest corners of the global elite. Sasha claims that as a child in the 1980s, he was illegally transported and mistreated by a massive network of high-profile individuals. At the absolute core of his allegations is his adoptive father, William Kyle Riley. Sasha alleges that his father wasn't just a pilot, he was a pilot for Jeffrey Epstein. This is where the story shifts from celebrity feud to global conspiracy. Sasha has described in chilling detail attending different gatherings on hidden farms in Enterprise, Alabama, places that were allegedly used as playgrounds for the most powerful men in the country. He has named names that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And for years, Sasha Riley was told that radio silence was of the utmost importance to protect other survivors. But once the Epstein documents started to leak and the flight logs began to surface in the public record, Sasha decided he was done being silent. This was the terrifying reality that existed in the shadows while daytime talk show hosts were dancing on TV and telling us to be kind. Sasha Riley's claims provided the missing link that Rosie O'Donnell and Kathy Griffin needed. They weren't just looking at a woman who was mean to her staff, they were looking at a woman whose name appeared in the broader index of high-profile individuals associated with the Epstein investigative materials. We are talking about flight logs, communications, and third-party interviews that all point in the same direction. When Sasha Riley began to speak out, he wasn't just a whistleblower, he was a threat to the entire system of protection that had kept the Hollywood elite safe for decades. This was the interview that was supposed to change everything. This was the moment the Be Kind mask was supposed to be ripped off for good. Kathy Griffin knew the stakes, and she prepared to put Sasha Riley on her podcast to name every single name and detail every single flight. But the elite network doesn't play fair, and the silencing machine was about to be activated with the level of force that even Kathy wasn't prepared for. The moment word got out that Kathy Griffin was going to give Sasha Riley a microphone, the response from the dark network was instantaneous. This wasn't just a matter of a few cease and desist letters from high-priced lawyers. We are talking about a level of intimidation that involves federal agencies and national security protocols. Kathy Griffin suddenly found herself under investigation by the Department of Justice. She was interrogated under oath. She was placed on the no-fly list. To the public, this was often framed as a reaction to her controversial political photos, but those close to the situation began to suspect a much more calculated move. The silencing machine wasn't just trying to punish her for a picture, it was trying to destroy her credibility and her ability to travel and work before she could air the Riley interview. The message was crystal clear. If you go through with this, if you expose the specific connections between the daytime elite and the Epstein ring, we will unleash an endless wave of lawsuits and investigations that will systematically destroy your life. At the very last minute, Kathy was forced to cancel the interview. She later apologized deeply to Sasha Riley, admitting that she simply couldn't withstand the legal pressure being exerted on her. But here's the thing, the very act of silencing her proved exactly what she was trying to say. You don't bring in the Department of Justice and put a comedian on a no-fly list over mean girl rumors. You do that when someone is threatening to collapse a massive criminal structure that involves the most powerful people on the planet. Even with the interview canceled, the facade was already done. The public was starting to see the strings. They were starting to understand that the Be Kind brand wasn't just a marketing tool, it was a suit of armor. It provided the perfect cover for someone who was part of a network doing unimaginable things. While Ellen was preaching kindness to her millions of devoted fans, the silencing machine was working overtime in the background to make sure that anyone who tried to tell the real story was labeled as a jealous conspiracy theorist or tied up in legal red tape until they went broke. But as the flight logs continued to leak and more whistleblowers like Sasha Riley began to emerge, the silencing machine started to run out of power. For years, there was a blog called Crazy Days and Nights that published long, detailed, blind items about the secret lives of the elite. At the time, these posts sounded like wild conspiracy theories from the deepest, darkest parts of the internet. They talked about a wealthy financier with a private island, elite gatherings, and a Lolita Express private jet that carried the most famous faces in the world to a place where no laws existed. They specifically and repeatedly linked a major daytime talk show host to these activities. Most people dismissed it. After all, how could the woman who loves pets and gives away free cars be involved in something so horrific? But then Jeffrey Epstein was arrested. Then he was offed in his cell under circumstances that were beyond suspicious. Suddenly, the blind items didn't look like crazy theories anymore. They looked like a roadmap. When the flight logs were officially leaked, the names on them became headlines that the networks could no longer ignore. The evidence wasn't just in the documents, it was hidden in plain sight in Ellen's own interviews over the years. There are clips of her talking to celebrities about their private islands, making jokes that, in hindsight, feel like coded communications between people who are part of the same inner circle. There's the conversation with Mel Gibson about his island, the F-Boy Island references, and a strange, persistent obsession with the idea of isolated paradises where the rules don't apply. When you connect these dots, the fake nice persona starts to look like a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It was the perfect shield. By building a brand based on radical kindness, Ellen made it so that any accusation against her seemed inherently absurd. She wasn't just a host, she was a secular saint, and saints don't fly on the Lolita Express. Except according to the documents and the whistleblowers, she did. The index of high-profile individuals associated with the Epstein investigative materials is vast, but her name is a focal point for a reason. For nearly 2 decades, the mask stayed in place because the audience wanted to believe it. They wanted to believe that someone that successful could also be that good. But brands built entirely on lies require an immense amount of energy to maintain, and eventually the pressure from the inside becomes too much for even the most powerful PR team to contain. This is where the story takes its most significant turn. For over 20 years, Rosie O'Donnell and Kathy Griffin were essentially standing alone. They were the ones facing public humiliation, career setbacks, and the mean girl label, while they watched Ellen smile at cameras and collect awards. They watched her actively work to erase their contributions and silence their voices. But they never backed down, and by finally teaming up, they didn't just expose a single talk show host. They pulled back the curtain on the entire dark network that had kept her in power. Their parallel interwoven paths have led them to a point where they are no longer just disgruntled ex-peers. They are the architects of a new kind of transparency. Rosie has used her massive social media platform to support Sasha Riley's message directly, bypassing the mainstream media that was too terrified to touch the story. She called him exactly what he is, an Epstein Island survivor. She told her millions of followers that while the story was hard to hear, it was absolutely essential that they listened to every single word. When her followers began to ask why the media was completely ignoring the Sasha Riley story, Rosie didn't dance around the answer. She called it a massive cover-up. She made it clear that she was using her platform specifically because the people who had the power to tell this story were too afraid of the consequences. This is the United Front. It's a combination of Rosie's emotional honesty and Kathy's tactical fearlessness. Together, they have made it impossible for the Be Kind brand to ever recover. They have shown exactly how the powerful protect each other, how the legal system gets weaponized against anyone who speaks out, and how the mainstream media's fear of the elite creates massive blackouts around the most important stories of our time. Their fight ensures that the public will never again trust the smiling face on the screen without asking what's happening off camera. They have proven that when women combine their platforms and their courage, they can take down systems that were never supposed to fall. The Queen of Nice didn't just lose her show, she lost her ability to hide. So where does this leave us? Ellen DeGeneres is currently tucked away in the English countryside, presumably hoping that the distance will buy her some peace. But running doesn't mean you're safe. It just means you've bought yourself a little more time. The toxic workplace scandal was the earthquake that shattered the foundation, but the Epstein connection is the tsunami that is still building. The facade that took decades to build is gone, and no amount of deflecting humor or cancel culture complaints is going to bring it back. But there are still massive questions that need answers. What exactly was the nature of the activities on that island? What did Ellen know about the network that was operating in the shadows of the entertainment industry? And perhaps most importantly, how many others are still being protected by the same silencing machine that tried to take down Kathy Griffin? Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell built an operation that connected the most powerful people in the world, and every day more pieces of that puzzle are falling into place. The story of Ellen DeGeneres is a cautionary tale about the cost of building an empire on a lie. It's a story about how kindness can be weaponized to hide the unimagined things. But it's also a story about the power of the truth. Rosie O'Donnell and Kathy Griffin proved that a manufactured image cannot survive forever against the relentless pursuit of reality. They suffered for years, but in the end, they were validated. As the flight logs continue to be analyzed and the witnesses continue to speak out, the final chapter of the Ellen DeGeneres saga is still being written. It's a chapter that might not just end with a canceled show, but with a total reckoning for an entire system of Hollywood protection. So the next time you see a celebrity preaching a message that seems too perfect to be true, remember the woman in the Cotswolds, remember the Be Kind mantra, and remember that the truth has a funny way of surfacing no matter how deep you try to bury it or how far you try to run. The ocean is wide, but the history of what really happened on that island is finally reaching the shore.